Okay.
It's a public meeting. Yep.
All right. It looks like they've started. It's streaming live on Facebook now if you want to call it to order, Chris.
Yeah, I'd like to call this meeting to order and appreciate everybody's attendance this evening. So just a couple things. I appreciate everybody's attendance. One of the things that Skylar and I talked about was the importance of having this meeting, even though it was on our in our view path to do that. It's important that we help everybody recognize and understand about the Redevelopment Commission and what the TIF really means. So although it's maybe a little bit earlier than we had anticipated doing it, I'm glad that we're going to handle this workshop tonight. So a couple things. Obviously, the commissioners are here. And I guess just maybe a couple things. One is, just from a clarity perspective and a transparency perspective, the agendas, the minutes of the past meeting, and all the finances of redevelopment commission meetings are actually sent out to all the redevelopment commission members and also city council prior to our meetings every month. So I certainly want to make sure that everybody's aware of that, and that from my perspective, discourse and communication is very important. And so if there are concerns or comments or questions, those should come to either Skylar or any one of the commissioners. We're all willing and able to do that. The second thing is, with respect to moving forward, as I mentioned in our last meeting, Skylar and I have agreed that we will put together a what I would call sanitized meeting or sanitized basically work in process, so that we can provide that to City Council. We certainly want to make sure that even though we may have, and now we have two commissioners that are on City Council, we want to make sure that what we're doing in a sanitized fashion is being communicated to City Council. So we are working on that document, and I think the promise is that we'll provide that on a monthly basis. Probably starting at the end of this month. It's a large job to get done in a short time manner. Skylar's very busy with a number of projects. And the last thing I really want to say is that based upon the open door law and other items that are in our executive committee, as they are in City Council, we're more than willing to have conversations about items that are public knowledge and public in the public domain. However, we certainly, as anybody in municipal government would do in any commission or board, they're certainly not going to have those discussions in a public forum. And so we will be as transparent as we can with respect to public knowledge. And moving from there, it becomes very difficult, particularly when we're having those, if there are certain specific issues that happen in an executive committee. So I'd like to defer right now to Councilman Mack, and also on the line tonight, just to make sure John Hendricks is here. I don't know that any of the other commissioners are on the line. If they are, they're on the phone. And then also Alan Cernick, our attorney, is here. And I think our agenda tonight is really to walk through the details of the TIF, how it works, what the benefits of it are. And we have a great team of people to do that. So I'll get into that after I'd ask Mr. Mack to make any comments with respect to the council.
I was going to introduce each council person individually, but the names are up there and we've got a full boat. Everyone is here right now. I am thankful and grateful for what you just said about the transparency, and I can't wait to see us really put that in action so we can put any doubts from past practice, past behaviors, whatever it may have been, that we're trying to move this forward in total sunlight and trying to accomplish some things that maybe haven't been done in Michigan City before. That's my goal here, and I'm sure that's the goal of every other councilman that I've been elected with this term. So in the interest of time, because we've got a big one coming up right after this, I will yield the floor, and I'm looking forward to here we have a great expert here tonight, well known throughout the state. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Right, take notes, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, so Skylar, would you be so kind, take yourself off of mute, and if you would just go through the really kind of the agenda that I don't know this public knowledge, but if you could go through that agenda very quickly, that would be great.
Give me one. Yes, absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody can hear me great. So let me get it brought up real quick. It was I tried to get it out as quickly as I could today. So just bear with me. You may not have gotten it. Just it came out probably right after lunch. Give me 1 second. So our tentative agenda tonight is, and this is subject to change. We can shift things around. We can stop in between, but we've just completed number 1, which is our introductions. I'm going to have Mr. Randolph Rampolla or Randy Rampolla go through a TIF 101. He's prepared some slides, and I think that would be helpful for us to understand the mechanics of TIF. And then next, I'm going to have Mr. Andy Mauser jump on. And he's going to go through a presentation that was presented to the Redevelopment Commission at a public meeting in October, probably our last real public meeting where we had, in-person meeting. And I would like for him to go through that again. And then finally, I'm going to have Mr. Rampolla jump back on and talk a little bit about refinancing of a couple of bonds that will be before the council soon. And then I want to make sure that we obviously open it up for questions and answers and get, whatever needs to be said or if you're curious about something out there so that we can get some answers, okay? So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Randy Rampolla, who's on the line with us, and I think he's prepared a few slides, and just kind of start with that, and we'll see how we go from here. So, Randy, with that, I'll hand it off.
Randy, if I can make one comment. I think it's important to understand that Randy has a vast experience with respect to TIF, and his organization have, I guess it's important to understand that this is somebody that has lived, breathed, and worked in TIF law for many, many years. And so that expertise is terribly important for us. And as well as with Andy, who will speak next, they're the experts that we bring in to make sure that they're doing the things that help us make sure we're doing it right within the guidelines of TIF within the state of Indiana, and also from a financial standpoint with Andy and his team. So I'm sorry to butt in there, Randy, but I just want to make sure I was clear about the team.
No, I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for your kind words. It's when you practice law for as many years as I have, and you worked in a particular area, you do learn a lot of things, and unfortunately, you also get a lot older too. So with the good comes the bad, I suppose. I'm going to, speaking of old, let me try to share my screen, so hopefully I can do this well and get started. I've got about 17 or 18 slides, but I'm going to probably get through them pretty quickly. So, but I'm happy to, if you have questions, stop me, feel free. So hopefully you are seeing my my slides. Is that fair?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Always amazed when I can make it work.
Well, we're seeing your notes though, so we're seeing the screen with your notes on it.
Okay. Well, let me try this. Oh. Is that...
hit your slideshow.
Oh. Okay. Well.
Yeah. Once you close, yes. I was gonna say when you open it up, if you got two screens, I'm not sure if you're working off of two screens or one.
Oh, I may have picked the wrong screen to share.
Yeah. But you have to start the presentation and then share the screen. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep, you're good.
All right. Sorry about that. Any event, my notes aren't all that exciting, but they do help me. So I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I know a few years ago, Andy, Jason Sumler, and I did a similar presentation to the Redevelopment Commission and the Council, and so I appreciate the chance to do it again. I think tonight I'm just going to give a very brief synopsis and not that long overview that I gave a few years ago. But TIF is really one of the best economic development tools that local communities have, and it is something that's used in a variety of ways throughout the country. Many states provide for tax increment. And here in Indiana, it's a very powerful economic development tool that when you are working with the state and the IEDC and they're looking for local matches for incentives, TIF is usually at the forefront of the incentives that can be offered by a local community. So the theory behind TIF is essentially, is on the screen. There's a problem that economic development is not happening, and it can't happen by virtue of just ordinary operations of private enterprise. And that's commonly known as the but-for test. You would like to have development in your community, but for certain conditions, that development isn't happening what we might say normally. And so the solution that was derived back in the 70s and across the country and primarily used beginning in the 80s here in Indiana was to use this new property tax revenue that would be generated by the development to help foster the development. So the taxes that would be paid by that new taxpayer would in fact be used to invest in the development that would make that new private enterprise grow or develop in the community.
Will you hear me finding the basics?
A couple of examples of obstacles that are frequently noted: if there's public infrastructure that just isn't sufficient. I some years back did a small transaction for a town where essentially they couldn't bring a factory to the community because the water lines weren't big enough. And so using tax increment, we were able to increase the size of the water lines, which lowered the insurance rating for the factory that was to be built. And it really was the insurance rating that was stopping that project. So infrastructure can be an issue. High cost of land can be an issue. Structured parking, again, if you're in a more urban environment where you need parking, the Redevelopment Commission can help with those types of projects. Environmental contamination, private enterprise frequently won't or can't invest the money that is needed to clean up a site. And so state and local funds often are required for that. And the last thing has really become, in the last 10 or 15 years, the incentive business has become just that. It's a business. And so, as I mentioned, when you look at what the IEDC is doing at the state level, there is always typically a state or a local match that would be required to match the state incentives. And that is in line with what another state may be offering. If a community or if a business is looking to locate in Indiana, may also be looking to locate in Illinois or Ohio or Michigan, the local and state incentives that are being offered by each of those state and local communities will factor into that business's decision to locate a particular area. This slide really gets to the heart of TIF, and it's such a good slide that I think when looking at Andy's materials, I think he has something similar, and I'll just to this about it. So if you look at the The green is the incremental increases in assessed value. The base AV, the theory behind tax increment is this: if you have land that is generating property taxes and the Redevelopment Commission declares it as a TIF area, that the blue, the base, all of the tax revenues that are generated from the tax rate being applied to that property will continue to flow to the overlapping taxing units. The increase, as a developer comes, he or she builds something or a company builds something there, the new assessed value, the tax rate that's applied to the new assessed value is reflected there in the green. That is what the Redevelopment Commission would capture to pay whatever incentive for economic development or project costs that would be necessary for that development to occur. Once the TIF area ends, then all of the assessed value would go back to the overlapping taxing units. So those overlapping taxing units would ultimately see the benefit of that increase in assessed value. And Andy will speak a little bit later about the specific areas that the city of Michigan City has, because some of your areas will have territory and assessed value that will be returning in not the too distant future, as some of the areas are ending by statute. So the creation of the Redevelopment Commission, you have a Redevelopment Commission, but just by way of background, it's created by the legislative body. In this case, of course, the Common Council would have created it back when. And it, once you, just to talk about terminology, so when people refer to a redevelopment district, the district is all of the territory of the city. So once a city creates a redevelopment commission, the city boundaries also form the boundaries of the redevelopment district. So when you think of the redevelopment district, that's the entire city. Within the redevelopment district, the commission can declare either a redevelopment area or an economic development area. Those would be smaller subsets within the district. And Michigan City certainly has a few of those within the city boundaries. Redevelopment areas were the original statutory creation, and that was to help eradicate what was then called blight. Now it's called area needing redevelopment. I think blight sounded too negative. Economic development areas came into being sometime later, and they are focused more on job creation. And they were allowed for areas that have greenfield sites where you're bringing in factories into a greenfield site. It may not be a blighted area, that may not be an area needing redevelopment, but certainly it's an area that will need help producing those jobs. So those are economic development areas. Within the economic or redevelopment area, then, the actual TIF mechanism is applied in a so-called allocation area. So I think all of your redevelopment areas each have, or economic development areas have, one allocation area per economic development area. It is possible to have an allocation area that is actually somewhat smaller than the entire economic development area. Or it's possible to have 2 or 3 areas within that economic development area. If you have 2 or 3 projects that are happening in one area, one economic development area, you might designate each of them as an allocation area so that you can pledge those tax revenues that will be generated as TIF to the particular project. So you might have separate allocation areas within the economic development area. Once the area is established, so if you were to create an area in February of 2021, the base date is the prior assessment date, which of course now is January. Back in the day, it used to be March, and now it's January 1. So anything that existed as far as assessed value as of January 1, that will be in the base. And the very next slide, we'll talk more about that. Anything that is created after January 1, as far as assessed value, will be the incremental increase in assessed value. That's where the tax revenues that are generated from that assessed value, that is what will be counted on as TIF. And TIF revenues, when they are collected, they are deposited with the Redevelopment Commission in the allocation fund. A few years ago, it used to be up until I think 3 or 4 years ago, the fiscal officer for the Redevelopment Commission was loosely the planning director or whoever was sort of running the staff of the Redevelopment Commission. A few years ago, the General Assembly saw fit to make that position fall within the fiscal officer for the city. So in your case, the city controller has control as controller of the TIF revenues in terms of accounting for them and making sure that they're created correctly and used correctly in that sense. So this is the slide I was talking about. Again, just another view. If you think of the base AV is that, again, assessed value that existed as of January 1st in an area. And that stays, you know, that identified, those identified parcels and that assessed value will continue on for as long as the TIF exists. So that base will always be there and will always be generating tax revenues. The incremental assessed value is the increment that will, the tax revenues from that will be pulled away and will go to the Redevelopment Commission and deposited into the allocation fund. And as referenced in the example there, if you create a TIF in December of 2020, the base date would go back to January 1st. So the new assessment that is occurring in 2020 then would be captured as TIF or as new assessed value, and the tax revenues would be captured as TIF and be allocated to the Redevelopment Commission for the purposes as laid out in the statute. And we'll just run through quickly the general powers. The theme, I think, as you look at all of these powers, they're all related to development. They're all, whether it's redevelopment or economic development in a community, they all do relate to development. So acquisition, disposition of property. I would note that the Redevelopment Commission no longer has, and this has been this way for a few years, no longer has condemnation powers. So if property were to be acquired through condemnation, it would be through the civil city and through the Common Council or the Board of Works that would have to take that. The Redevelopment Commission would acquire property through an appraisal process. It does have the ability to get into the weeds a little bit. One of the benefits of a Redevelopment Commission and economic development project, it can pay above the appraised value for property. And that's one thing that's a little bit different from the civil city. The civil city is generally locked in at paying not higher than the appraised value. The Redevelopment Commission does have the authority to exceed appraised value if it affirmatively votes to do that. It can clear property. It can take on all sorts of projects in that area, that economic development area or redevelopment area, to foster redevelopment or economic development. As we talked about, it can undertake environmental remediation. It can repair, improve property. Some communities, they'll buy an old building. The Redevelopment Commission will spend money to rehab the building, and then they'll offer it for disposition. There's a here in South Bend, the LaSalle Hotel is a great example. The LaSalle Hotel had been around for decades. Years ago, as a famous hotel. It fell into disrepair, disuse. The Redevelopment Commission acquired it, I think, weeks before the wrecking ball was going to take it on. And it sat vacant for a long time, and the Redevelopment Commission spent money to keep the property at least at a point where it could be, wasn't falling down. And finally, it was, they were able to get a developer to come in and turn it into apartments, and now it's back. It's now a success. There's a couple of restaurants, a bar in it, and apartments above. So generally, the powers of the Redevelopment Commission all relate to redevelopment and economic development and undertaking capital projects. So one of the things you won't see here is using, and I think we say it more affirmatively later, but use TIF dollars for what would be viewed as operational expenses. As under current law, the Redevelopment Commission generally has to come to the Common Council for approval to either expand an existing area, so it would be possible to increase the size of an economic development area or an allocation area. That requires Common Council approval. Any type of financing that the Commission would undertake, including a lease financing with the Redevelopment Commission, with the Redevelopment Authority, that would require Common Council approval. So the Redevelopment Commission under current law, and it wasn't always this way, redevelopment commissions used to have a little bit more independence, but under current existing law, the commission does come to the council for approval. The most recent one I can think of is it used to be the case that redevelopment commissions could acquire property on installments, in an installment purchase contract. The city of Carmel did that quite famously or infamously with its Performing Arts Center. And the General Assembly didn't appreciate that. And so now if a redevelopment commission wants to acquire property over a period of time, they have to come to the council for approval. I think it's 3 years. If it extends past 3 years, then council approval is required for that as well. So just to designate an area, to have a TIF allocation area, you have to have a redevelopment area or an economic area. And just the process, again, is the Redevelopment Commission adopts a declaratory resolution. The Plan Commission reviews it and has to approve it as the planning body. It then would go to the City Council, which is approving the Plan Commission's determination and also approving the designation of the area by the Commission. And then final action would be to come back to the Redevelopment Commission for a public hearing. And also at that point, to the extent you're adding an a TIF allocation area to the provisions, there would be a tax impact statement. So all of the overlapping tax units would get information regarding the tax impact with respect to the creation of that TIF allocation area. So at that public hearing, not only do members of the public have the opportunity to speak, but the taxing units, the officials from the tax units would get the notice and the tax impact statement as well. And there's just another definition of tax increment there, but I think we've covered that enough, so I'll skip over that. And again, permissible uses of TIF revenues, property acquisition, disposition, to the extent that the city of Michigan City, that we refer to as the civil city, makes expenditures, capital expenditures in or in territory that is located in the area or physically connected to the area, the Redevelopment Commission can reimburse for those types of expenditures as well. The one difference between the Redevelopment Commission spending money itself and reimbursing the city for expending city dollars, the Redevelopment Commission can spend TIF money on projects that are either located in or serving the area. With respect to the city, if it were to spend money and seek reimbursement from the Redevelopment Commission, the project that the money is spent on either has to be located in or it has to be physically connected to the area. So there's a difference between serving and physically connected. And again, that was probably 3 or 4 years ago, the legislature just put a few more restrictions on how TIF dollars can be used. There is a provision, I think the Redevelopment Commission has used this, if my memory's right, that you can use some TIF money up to 15% from particular areas for education or worker training. I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, and Scott can tell me if I'm right or not, I think the Redevelopment Commission has partnered with Michigan City Schools and has used TIF money for technology. And you may still be doing that.
Yes, we are.
Okay, yeah, and that's fairly common around the state. That was added. The worker training part has always been there, but I think lawyers got more and more comfortable that worker training actually begins in grade school these days. I mean, kids in 2nd and 3rd grade are using tablets. They're clearly better with technology than I am, and so that early start on technology is viewed as a positive for economic development in the state. And so I don't know of anyone that's not comfortable with using TIF dollars in that way. So that worker training provision has been extended to grade school and high school education as well. There's a provision in there for efficiency projects. If you're partnering with another government entity through an interlocal agreement, you can use some TIF dollars for that. There is a provision in the regs that would allow, and I don't know whether you do this or not, some communities do this, and I just can't recall. Again, Skylar can correct me, but to the extent that you can't just pay salaries because that would be viewed as an operating expense. But to the extent you have active projects and you have staff people within the city working on those projects, you can have the staff people track their time, and you can pay a portion of their salary that would equate to the amount of time they're putting into a particular project. And so I do know communities that have active redevelopment projects that are, over a 2 or 3 year period will look to reimburse some of the salary expenses related to those projects that are incurred by staff time. So that is a possible expense. And we do note here, again, you can't use TIF for operational expenses. And a good example of that, there was a case a few years ago out of Munster where the Redevelopment Commission was asked to fund the construction of a park as a redevelopment or economic development project, which they did. But then the city also had the Redevelopment Commission begin to pay for the maintenance expenses in the park. And there was a lawsuit challenging the use of TIF for the maintenance expenses. And the court ultimately ruled that maintaining a facility is more of an operating expense, and you can't use TIF dollars for operational expenses. So you can use it for the capital expense of building the improvement to the extent it's located in or it can be deemed to be serving the area, but you can't use it for the operating expenses. You can use TIF dollars for so-called soft costs, right? Legal or accounting expenses. You can use TIF dollars for those types of things. But you can't use them for more of the operational expenses. I'm just cruising through here. I'm happy to, please stop me if there are questions. But one thing you can do, and I think Michigan City may have done this in the past for particular projects. Typically, TIF only relates to real property taxes. So in certain instances, when you have manufacturing projects primarily or technology projects like data centers that are very, very personal property equipment, computer technology type equipment heavy, then you can designate the owner of that equipment as a so-called designated taxpayer. And that will allow the Redevelopment Commission to collect not only the real property taxes, but also the personal property taxes. And so you can, and you have to show that you need those taxes for a particular purpose, primarily to pay debt service on bonds that were issued for that particular project. There have been a number of large manufacturing facilities or data centers that have popped up around the state where redevelopment commissions have provided various incentives and issued debt. And so the state General Assembly saw fit to allow them to declare that as a designated taxpayer and collect not only the real property, but the personal property as well. And so it has to be industrial, manufacturing, warehousing, research, development. So you couldn't do a retail project, Southside Mall or something. You couldn't do that. You couldn't designate and capture personal property. First of all, there probably wouldn't be a lot of personal property taxes. But as the slide indicates, it's not uncommon to have a manufacturing facility or a technological facility of some sort, a data center, where the personal property is far in excess of whatever the real property assessed value would be, just given the value of the equipment. So, and I think, again, Andy will speak more about this, but the current, if you were to designate a new TIF area today, the first bullet point is applicable so that it's a 25-year term beginning on the date that obligations are incurred payable from the TIF revenues that would be generated from that area. Old TIF areas, and I think your northern area fits within that, and Andy can correct me, but that has a 30-year moratorium, and so some of those will start to roll off. There are some TIF areas that were created, and this may be your northern area, that were created before 95 that had debt that was incurred prior to June 30 or July 1, 2015. Those areas will expire June 30, 2025. But again, if you had debt prior to July 15 that was incurred, they can run until that debt is paid off. And Andy will talk in more detail with respect to your particular areas, but some of your areas you expanded over the years. each time you expand, that expansion area has its own 25-year life under current law. So your areas won't go away all at once. They'll go away incrementally, depending upon how they may have been expanded over the years. So I think my last slide, just to talk a little bit about TIF financing structures. The one thing you can do with TIF is you can pay as you go. So as you collect TIF, you can pay for projects on an ongoing basis. And I know the Redevelopment Commission has done that over the years. But in addition to the pay as you go, you can also issue bonds, and you have done that as well. There are pure TIF revenue bonds that are payable solely from the TIF that's being generated. Those likely will have the highest interest rate because they're the riskiest, because it's based solely on the TIF revenues that are being generated. So if you have a project where a developer comes in, builds a manufacturing facility, and you're collecting the TIF revenue off that manufacturing facility, a bond buyer that would buy bonds payable from that facility, TIF revenues, is really buying into the company at some level. Because if the company goes away and those TIF revenues aren't there, the city doesn't have to pay those bonds from any other source. It may choose to, but it doesn't have to. The other option would be to do a property tax backup, and some of your debt does have that in place. And that's, in a way, from the city's perspective, the best of both worlds, because you're using the TIF revenues as a primary revenue source. You're not levying that tax, but it's as if you have, a rich uncle, if you will, because you can go out to the bond market, much like you would go to a bank and say, look, I've got this ability to raise money over here, so give me a better interest rate. And that's effectively what the bond market will do. The bond market they'll look at the revenues, but they really will look at the tax backup. And even though you're not intending on levying it, the bondholder knows that you would have to levy if your TIF revenues were insufficient. So you will get the lowest interest rate possible from that. And so that's a fairly common financing technique to get the best rate for the city and the Redevelopment Commission. The last bullet point there, and I know we've had some discussions from time to time about particular projects, it is possible for the city, the civil city, to issue bonds. The Redevelopment Commission pledges TIF to those bonds, and those bonds are actually purchased by the developer or by the developer's bank. The benefit from that is the developer or the developer's bank is the one bearing the risk. If the developer doesn't build what he or she says they will build, then the city's not on the hook. If the project isn't assessed the way the developer says it will be assessed, again, the city's not on the hook. And so that's a fairly common financing technique where you've got a specific project based on a development that is occurring. Typically, there's a development agreement in place. The developer's agreeing to build certain things. The city will agree to use this financing technique, but it's clear that the city is not at risk in that scenario. So that if the TIF revenues are not generated, the developer or the developer's bank simply doesn't get paid. If the bonds are sold to the bank, typically the bank will have its own arrangements with the developer at that point. But that, again, that's a fairly common, the last two are fairly common financing techniques in the state to provide local incentives. So I've rushed through. I'm happy to answer any questions. I just didn't want to, take a whole lot of your time, but I thought it'd be helpful to at least set the stage. Then as Andy goes through his more detailed review of your particular areas and the TIF revenues, you would at least have that background. So I'll stop talking and give you a chance to answer any questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Randy, thank you for that update. It's a lot of information to digest all at once. The nice part about this is that there is your handout that everybody has availability to get to and review. What I'd like to do, Mr. Mack, if you're okay with it, we'll divert all questions to the end. Let Andy go next and get through his piece, and then get back to Randy on his last piece. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Chris,
Andy,
I was going to say, if Chris, I could just speak, the thing I will say in terms of the agenda, the piece about the refunding, I think Andy will actually cover that sort of at the end of his discussion. I'm happy to after he does about sort of the legal process, but
Yeah.
most of the refunding piece, I think Andy will actually cover as he talks through the numbers. So
Perfect. Yep. Thanks, Randy. That was a great update on where we are. You ready, Andy?
Thanks for having me this evening. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
oh, now we can. Yep.
Thanks for having me this evening. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on there, but thanks for having me this evening. I'm Andy Mauser with Baker Tilly. Served as financial advisor to the Redevelopment Commission for, I think, going on 11 years now. And as a firm, we've served as financial advisor to the Redevelopment Commission, I know, going back quite some time. So as Skylar mentioned, wanted to go through a presentation that we had done at a public meeting for the Redevelopment Commission back in October. We've made a few small updates to this presentation, but it's essentially the same information that was presented then. We've made some updates for your December collections, some of your debt payments that have been made since then. But overall, this is the same information for your 4 TIF areas. Stacked information in here. Certainly encourage you to reach out to myself or Jason or Sam if you ever do have questions. That's what we're here for, obviously, to answer any questions or provide any information that you might need. So with that, I'll go through your 4 TIF areas here fairly quickly and certainly can answer questions at the end. First, wanted to go through, I guess, one of your larger TIF areas. You probably know it more by the north side or downtown TIF area. Legally is known as the Community Center #1 Expanded Urban Renewal Area, which I know is quite a mouthful. But this is your oldest TIF area and one of your healthiest TIF areas. Just for a little bit of history, it was actually established way back in 1986. So it's one of the older TIF areas, I think, even around the state, really. And that first piece is when they didn't have a cap on their lifespan. So that original piece had an unlimited life. And then in 2015, there was that life was actually capped by new legislation. So it'll expire at the end of your 2015 bonds in 2040. You've got 2 expansions that were done. One in 1997, which expanded the area to the east, picked up Blue Chip and some of the surrounding property. And actually at that time, when Blue Chip was included, the agreement was to go ahead and pull the outlet malls out of the TIF area at that time. So you've captured Blue Chip as TIF, but the outlet has been released back to the tax base and benefits the city and all the overlapping taxing units because of that. And that piece of the area has a 30-year life, so it'll expire in 2027. And that's notable because, going back to that graph that Randy showed, you'll have significant assessed value that will start to flow back to the overlapping tax base in 2027. Between this area and the south side area, there's actually about 180 million that will flow back through in 2028. So pretty significant impact that you'll start to see here within the decade. And then the last expansion was done in 2018, and that was done a smaller expansion kind of to the northeast, and that has a 25-year life. This past year, you captured about $4.1 million in TIF, and actually your collections were slightly above that. And as big as this area is, as many parcels that are in there, it's typical to see your collections on an annual basis kind of come in between 95% and 105% of where we think they will. And that's just due to, in certain years you may have taxpayers that pay late and pay the following year. So you usually see slight fluctuations, but in the long run, we see your collections come out where we expect them to. This year, in 2021, you should see a little bit of growth. You do have 3 outstanding debt obligations from that area. The first is your 2011 Elston Grove bonds. And all your debt obligations, except for the last one I'll talk about in this presentation, do have a property tax backup. Again, that gets you the best rating on the bond. It's the best security, so it gets you the lowest interest rate. But to date, the city's never utilized that property tax, and we don't think that you ever will. You've got sufficient TIF to pay these off all through their full maturity. So the 2011 bonds, you can see they're about halfway paid off, 5.7 million issued. You've got 3 million outstanding through 2028. And these are one of the two that are a current refunding opportunity to potentially save you some money on, which I'll hit on here in a couple slides. Wabash Street bonds, you've got 3.3 million that were issued, 2.7 million outstanding through 2040, and those also are a refunding opportunity as well. And then you've got the 2019 bonds that were refunding themselves last year. We were able to generate sufficient, some pretty significant savings for the city by refunding those. So that's very similar to what we would look to do with your 2011 and 2015 bonds. And you've already paid about $1 million of principal from when we did that refunding last year to now on those, and you'll fully pay those off in 2028. So kind of looking at, we've seen what your TIF, we've seen what debt you have. The next slide really kind of pulls all that together, I think. You can see going out your annual TIF collections over the next, it'll drop in 2027 as that base. You'll start to see your TIF collections decline, but you will see, from the city's perspective, you will see positive impacts from that. And that's not a concern that the TIF will go away, because we've always planned for that. We've structured your debt around that. You'll see when that major drop off happens in 2028, your 2011 bonds and your 2019 bonds will be fully repaid by then. So currently you capture about 4.3 million, and between the three debt obligations, you pay just under $1.5 million per year. So that leaves you extra money for projects on an annual basis. That leaves you money for the school technology grants, which you've done and continue to do. That leaves you money that you can accumulate when we did the double in hand and then finance just $5 million. So, building up those balances allows you to do projects without having to bond, and is always a good tool as well. The refinancing opportunities I won't spend a ton of time on. I think we can, we'll be coming back for approvals from the Redevelopment Commission, Redevelopment Authority, and Council, so we can maybe spend some more time on those at a later date. But, on the 2011 bonds, those payments right around $500,000 a year. Based on current rates, we think we could bring those payments down by about $25,000 simply by reducing your interest rate. So that's $25,000 a year that would be, in TIF that you wouldn't be spending on debt service over that 8-year period. That in today's dollars results in about $170,000 net benefit, and that's net of all fees, financing costs, things like you can save money on your semi-annual payment. The 2015 bonds are a smaller issue, so the annual savings is a little bit less, about $10,000, but it's also spread over a 20-year period. So it results in a pretty similar net savings, about $160,000 there. So between the two, you're talking, maybe $35,000. And I think hopefully that's a conservative estimate, kind of based on where rates have been even here more recently. So, on the far right column, you can see for every, about every dollar of debt service you have, you currently collect about $3 in TIF. So like I said, very healthy coverage on your debt. We don't anticipate you would ever need to levy a property tax. And then it also gives you monies left over to do additional projects. The next area is your south side area, also one of your larger two areas. It also has three pieces by in 27. Again, that's a piece of that $180 million of assessed value that will go away here in a couple of years. 2012, it was expanded to pick up the Dunes Plaza retail area on the south side of town. That has a 25-year life. And then in 2015 was expanded to pick up the mall. So that has a 25-year life as well. You capture right around $4 million a year. Your collections have been right in line and should grow slightly even this year. With this area, you do have, we're actually showing 4 obligations here, but one of them actually was paid, was February 1st of this year, so those are no longer outstanding. And then you do have the 2015 refunding bonds through 2028, your 2018 Ohio Street bonds that did the road work and stormwater improvements down near the new hospital through 2039, and then the double track financing to pay for the South Shore, the city and the county's portion of that here a couple years ago, and that will those will be fully repaid by 2028. So then again, looking at similar schedule here, you've got very healthy coverage in this area as well. Not quite as levels are a little bit tighter, but still very, very healthy. We typically look for at least 125% coverage, and you're well within the 180% range here. So you can see your various debt obligations and how those are kind of structured around the roll-offs in your TIF, just like we did in the North Side TIF. But it leaves you about $1.8 million per year for other projects going forward, and leaves you, additional capacity as different opportunities arise. So that's kind of your 2 main TIF areas. You do have the 2 newer or smaller TIF areas, the third being your Northeast TIF area. It was set up in '99 with a 30-year life, so it'll expire here in 2029. Collects right around $300,000 facility in the event they have within their facility. And that debt is a little bit unique because there is no property tax backup behind it. So you pay 90% of the TIF that you capture. The company's responsible if it was ever short, and the city would not be obligated to make up any difference. And actually, in the past, the city has made that 90% share, and the company's been obligated to make up a portion of it, and always has. So that's been, a good relationship. And those bonds actually were paid off yesterday as well. Was the final payment on those. So just to look. Again, you've got about 10 years of collections going forward. You can continue to pull in that. To note, we had, I think I saw Yvonne Hoffmaster on here as well. We had worked with her office in the last few weeks, kind of went back and did a reconciliation of all the payments you had made to date on those bonds. Actually had identified with her office's help, overpayment that was made by the city back in 2018. So we were able to kind of reduce the payment you owed here on the last one. So rather than paying upwards of $260,000 for your last year's worth of payments, we were able to get that down to about $130,000, which obviously means more money in the Redevelopment Commission's pocket this year as well. So those are fully paid off going forward, fully reconciled. So nothing to worry about with those in the future. And then your last area is your East Side TIF area. It was set up in 2015, has a 25-year life, but never issued any debt to date. So that clock, the 25-year clock, really hasn't started. You also haven't seen any collections from this. There hasn't been necessarily major growth in that area. Some of that too, I think, has been with efforts to get this area properly set up at the county level. We work with the various county offices to administer the TIF areas. So we've been working with them to hopefully kind of correct this area going forward. And I think you could hopefully maybe start to see some collections. Probably not in 2021, but potentially starting in 2022 or going forward. So we're constantly in contact with the county auditor's office to make sure your collections are in line with where they should be, and we'll continue to monitor that one going forward. So those are the 4 areas. And like I said, I'll got a couple more slides here, but then we'll kind of keep it open the last 15 minutes or so for any questions you might have on any of that. I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. But the last piece we wanted to walk through again is kind of that impact piece. You know, it's a very valuable tool. Looking at the project's improvements, so when you look at, Ohio Street, the road work, stormwater improvements, when you look at Wabash Streetscape, those are all major infrastructure and projects that you would have had to have funded from another source. And TIF's always been your funding tool that you're able to do that without raising tax rates, raising property tax rates, income tax rates. You've been able to utilize existing dollars to pay for all that. So, I think in Michigan City's perspective, TIF's always been a valuable tool and should be going forward. So, going back to this slide, this is the kind of the same graphic that Randy had shown, and I think it is powerful in the way of, really your different TIF areas, and actually those different pieces of your different TIF areas are really kind of on different parts of this graph. You could argue, your east side areas kind of over to the left still, where you're seeing that base value protected, but you're not really seeing any growth yet. That original piece of your north side area and that expansion of your south side, I mean, they're in the right part of that green box. So you're to the point where you're capturing significant TIF, but then you're also right on the verge of giving those assessed value dollars back to the overlapping tax base. And that really is the goal of TIF, to leverage that private investment, put it back into infrastructure, back to the tax base. So, you'll start to see a lot of that impact. Like I said, in 2027, you'll see impacts throughout the 2030s into the 2040s as the rest of your TIF areas expire. So really TIF's doing kind of what it's designed to do with all your areas. And then we wanted to just kind of do an illustrative, we hear sometimes, and not necessarily even in Michigan City in particular, but in communities around the state, what if we didn't have TIF, what would it look like? And so we had done an analysis of, you capture currently about $286 million of assessed value, which results in about $8.4 million of TIF between your four TIF areas. And like I said, you use that to pay debt, use that for ongoing projects. If you were to take that $286 million and put it all back in the tax base, it would have a significant impact on bringing down your tax rates, because you would be, again, adding tax base, that would bring down the amount that each taxing unit would levy. So it would pull down your tax rates by about 47 cents. At the same time, those $8.4 million for debt service for other projects, if you then turned around and levied a property tax to get that same $8.4 million, to put that on Michigan City taxpayers, it would require a 64-cent tax rate. So I think really kind of what it's showing here, if you were to get rid of all your TIF, but then still find a way to bring in the same amount of revenues, you would actually have to increase tax rates citywide by 17 cents. So that would have a fairly significant impact on all your taxpayers. That would pull up your tax rates, which would cause additional circuit breaker pressures on the city that you see through your general fund. I know that's something that the city and really all communities in Indiana struggle with is circuit breaker. So really TIF, I mean, from your perspective, it's the most efficient tool and the most valuable tool really for you to capture the investment that you're helping create, around the city. And then, like I said, leverage that back into improvements that continue to help the city develop going forward. So hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the area specifically or TIF in general. I know we've got maybe 15 minutes or so remaining.
Andy, thank you so much. As my comment to you in October was such that in the 19 pages you provided us, this is the most important page. The understanding of TIF, albeit complex, the true understanding of it is that without TIF, in allowing us to do projects, if we wanted to do projects, street, landscape, whatever the project is, if we wanted to do those things without TIF, our tax rate would go up. The people in Michigan City would pay a higher tax rate. And I guess I would challenge the fact or make the statement that I don't think any city council person in Michigan City or any other city wants to state that, hey, we need this to do this project, and to do it, we're going to go out and get a bond and generate debt, and our taxes are going to go up. This is an economic development opportunity, economic development tool for us, and it's so important. So it's the one page that makes so much sense to me. It really hits home. It really identifies the importance of TIF. So thank you so much. I think we identified kind of all the items on the agenda. The other folks on the line here, I'd like to at least acknowledge Jim Meyer, City Council attorney, and also Alan Cernek, who has provided myself with many hours of consternation and pain over the last year or so. He is the attorney for the Redevelopment Commission. And there are a couple other folks that are on the line that obviously Yvonne is on, and then there are a couple of folks on the phone. So I'd like to, at least at this point, open it up to questions. There are, Skylar, I'll go to you afterwards on a couple questions that hands were raised, but I'd go to Don Przeblinski. Don, you're on mute. Mute. You're on mute. Still on mute.
There we go. I found the button. Okay. Question for Randy. Is it wise, or when does it become advantageous to the city when it comes time for the TIF district to pay, to pay bonds off? Does it make sense to pay them off early in order to save on the interest rate and paying interest on them, or to just let them run their course?
I think it depends upon it's a good question. It really does depend upon the intended use of the available TIF cash flow on an annual basis. So if you can say that all of the projects that, were intended to be done or could be done with tax increment revenues are done, and you don't have any further projects going forward, so as if you had surplus cash, then you might look at paying debt off. I know a lot of communities around the state have looked at that question over the last couple of years in particular, and are determining not to do that only because interest rates are so crazy low. Interest rates, we had a bond deal that was below 1% a week or so ago. And so I think some communities look at that and say, well, yes, there's a cost to borrowing money now, but there may be a cost to paying it off and not have cash available going forward. So I think, again, it really depends upon where you are in your development. If you have no more development projects in the city and you're just sitting there with that cash, then maybe it would make some sense. But I think most communities, to be able to, you're in a good position. Let me say it this way: you're in a good position because a lot of communities don't have that TIF cash flow, and they don't really have the ability to use TIF as a shovel-ready incentive. The term shovel-ready is very, everybody uses it, but here you have shovel-ready TIF. I mean, if a developer comes to town tomorrow, and I know there are some discussions ongoing with developers, but if you have a project that comes to town and says, we want to locate in Michigan City, but here's the incentive we need, you have some ability to deal with that. If you use all of the TIF to pay the debt off and don't have any cash in your piggy bank, if you will, then you may not be in such a good position.
Okay. Thank you, Randy.
Yep.
Ms. Tillman has this question.
Yes, I'd like to direct this question to Andrew. I am the councilwoman of the Fifth Ward, and when you spoke on the East Side EDA, could you expound on when you said this particular TIF is getting, this area is going to be set up by the county? What did you mean by that?
Correct. So the area was
You're breaking up. I can't hear you.
when they are established, go through a process. Okay.
Now I can.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So all your anytime you set up or expand a TIF area, it goes through a citywide approval process. So it's set up by your redevelopment commission through planning commission, council approval, and then back to the redevelopment commission. Once it's actually established, it's really kind of administered at the county level. So all property taxes flow through your county treasurer. The county treasurer and county auditor then distribute property taxes to all the overlapping units, determine what goes to TIF. So while it's set up at a local level, at the city level, it does. The property tax system, like I said, works kind of at a county level. So we worked with the auditor's office just to make sure that their software is doing what we think it should, make sure it's calculating those TIF dollars correctly when they receive TIF on a semi-annual basis, get distributed correctly. So like I said, it's approved at a city level, but then countywide level.
Okay, that makes sense. And
does that make sense?
The way it was conveyed, I interpreted as far as any type of projects or development on the east side that the county would have had a say or in regards to that.
No, not that they have a say in what's captured or not. Just as we look through, because databases of every parcel within the county, every part within your TIF areas, not capturing within your TIF areas, that those are actually the correct parcels. So like I said, it's kind of just based on their property tax system and the software that they use, and making sure that it's doing what it is set out to do.
Okay, thank you.
I might add, if I could, one quick thing too, that Andy and Baker Tilly provide a valuable service is, and this is a minor thing, but in a lot of cases when there are properties that are in a TIF area, if the parcel is subdivided, the new parcel will get a new parcel ID number. And sometimes that can get missed by the auditor's office. So it might be generating or should be generating TIF revenues, but it doesn't always get identified as a parcel with TIF revenue because it has a different parcel number. So and Andy and Baker Tilly is really good about sniffing that out and making sure that the auditor codes it correctly.
Right. Yeah, we like to monitor all that on an annual basis just to make sure you're getting the dollars that you should be getting.
Mr. Dabney?
Yeah, quick question in regards to this. I guess this will tie in with education and worker training. I was thinking about TIF districts and how they all work, but I think I found the answer in your presentation when you talked about operational expenses. Could a TIF district, within the TIF district, could you guys hire or use someone like a code enforcement officer that would, work only in TIF district area that could be paid through TIF district funds? That sounds to me like operations, but I just wanted to really get a clarification if the TIF district or the redevelopment commission could do something like that and ease some of the burden off of the city code enforcement officers as they work within TIF districts.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it would be viewed as an operational expense. The Department of Local Government Finance and its regulations did give the specific example of somebody that's involved with an economic development project. So if you have a portion of Skylar's time, for example, that is working with a developer to structure a project, he can account for his time, and then some of the TIF dollars can be used to pay a portion of his salary. But I think anything beyond that, I think would be viewed as an operational expense, Councilman. I think that would be, I think the State Board of, and I don't think we spoke to this, but the entity that would come back and slap you on the wrist would be the State Board of Accounts. And they require that some of that money be reimbursed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul Przwolinski, you're on mute. Paul, you're on mute. Paul, you're on mute.
Caleb, can you unmute Paul?
There you go.
I have two questions, and why are you telling Andrew? Are you saying that there's no money collected on that east side because of a problem at the auditor's office, or is I thought that they wouldn't be collected unless you have a bond issue for that east side? Is that correct? Or is that wrong? That they haven't issued bonds, so there's no collection taking place?
No, really, the collection of TIF is independent from whether you have debt outstanding. So if there has been any growth within that TIF area, you will start to capture dollars, regardless of if you have any long-term debt outstanding. So
any new development, correct?
Correct.
Is there? I don't know, Skylar. Can I ask another question to Skylar? Has there been any development in that east side TIF since 2015, Skylar? Mr. York?
Not that I'm aware. There is now, but it's brand new development. Can you hear me okay?
No.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, there's brand new development like GAF in Millennium Park. I can't think of, there's going to be some more development coming along down the line. I believe Midwest Metals is planning an expansion. There's some expansions planned for some of those industrial areas around 212 that they're planning to expand. The interest rates are right now. They're taking advantage of loans and things of that nature. So.
And my other question is, how much area can be brought into the TIF, and does it have to? It evidently doesn't have to be attached to an existing TIF area, but under state law, can the whole city be classified TIF as Carmel did? And has there been any repercussions in legislation concerning that at the state level?
So I'll jump in, and Andy may want to offer answer as well. There is actually specific guidance in the Department of Local Government Finance regulations that says specifically you cannot TIF the entirety of the city. So you could not have a TIF over the entire city. Short of that, there is not any restriction as how much you can TIF, but you just can't have the entire city. And so I don't think Carmel declared the entire city, but they did declare a large portion of the downtown, and there are different cities that have done different things. So you can, as you indicated, Councilman, you can add on to a TIF area or an economic development area, or you can designate a new area. The question is, whether or not you would have development that would generate TIF revenues in a particular area. And I know frequently the question comes up, we have needs in our neighborhoods, we have needs in our residential areas, and that's a very common issue for cities around the state and towns around the state that we deal with. And it can be very difficult because TIF is not, TIF generally cannot be used, or you cannot collect TIF from residential property. And there's a footnote to that, but I'll get to that in a minute. But so if you were to add residential area to an existing TIF area, you might actually end up decreasing TIF collections because assessed values on houses might be different, residential houses, and it might actually decrease the ability to collect TIF in that entire area. And I'll let Andy comment on that. The footnote on the residential TIF, the General Assembly 2 years ago did put a provision into the statute to allow for housing TIF, but there are very specific requirements for that, and it is really geared more toward communities that are trying to incent or create new housing in a particular area. And so you can generate TIF from that type of housing. So it is a possibility, and certainly, one we'd be happy to talk more about. But if you're looking at a neighborhood with declining assessed values, adding that to a TIF area actually, and this is where I'll turn it over to Andy, but actually can be a negative.
Yeah, that's a good point, Randy. Up until a couple of years ago, residential within TIF areas was actually just kind of ignored. So it was removed from the calculations, and then the legislation was changed. So you no longer, if you have a $150,000 home that, has an addition built, it's not going and, increases to $200,000. You're not going to capture that $50,000 of growth. But at the same time, legislation a couple of years ago says if that $150,000 home declines to $100,000, so you have a $50,000 loss, that actually would offset some of your positive growth elsewhere within your TIF areas. So there's no positive benefit to including residential, but there can be quite a bit of negative benefit depending on kind of what your home values are doing and how many residential parcels are within a TIF area. So we just typically recommend at least in your traditional non-residential TIF areas, excluding residential for the most part, to the extent that you can.
Okay, and my last question is, on the north end TIF, which is called the Expanded Urban Renewal Area, could you tell me why the that tunnel project was left out of this report? Or were those bonds paid off for that tunnel that is underneath 11th Street? That was supposed to be connected to the Lafayette Barker Sewer Project.
I believe those bonds I believe were done in 2010 and then were refunded in 2019. So I think that's the 2019 issuance that you see there on that first page.
I was going to say, I think
refunding bond issuance.
Yep, I think those are the 2019 bonds.
Okay.
So I know on the new money projects, we've tried to include the project names on there, but some of the refundings, I don't think we track back quite as far, but I'm pretty sure that was the refunding of the 2010s for the Lafayette Barker project.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, in the interest of time, I got two questions from the public.
Skylar,
If that's okay, if I could read those.
Skylar, Mr. Dabney has a question real quick.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Dabney.
That's okay.
Just a quick question. When he started talking about refunding of a bond, I just wanted him to explain that real quick, what that meant, because that's a kind of a complicated term in terms of dealing with bonds. When he said refunded.
Yeah, so it works. Good question. Much the same way as refinancing of your home mortgage. If you can, if you've got a 4% interest rate and you can go out and get that down to a 3%, you can save money on your, on a mortgage, your monthly payment. On your bonds, it's a semi-annual payment. So that's what we've done several times in this for the city. Refinanced them and brought those payments down. And, like I talked a little bit about, I know kind of quickly on your north side area, that's what we would hopefully do here with your 2011 and 2015 bonds, is just lock those into a lower interest rate and then save you money, on your semi-annual payments. So we've done that a number of times through the years as interest rates are favorable.
Yeah, but I just wanted to put that out there because people would understand refinance better than refund.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And we're not changing the terms on the bonds or anything. We pay them off in the same amount of time. You would just reduce that interest rate and save money on an annual basis. So good question.
And I would also add, just from a approval standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, that would go through the Redevelopment Commission and the lease funds would go through the authority. But both of those ultimately would come for approval before the Common Council.
Tracy, you had your hand up one more time.
Yes, I just have one other question. So out of the 4 TIFs and with their allocations from their revenue, is there a way that a list could be comprised as far as how those funds was allocated or to what projects, or what was contributed from those TIF, from the increments from the TIFs, what was done within the neighborhoods, within the wards, whether it's infrastructure, sidewalks, other businesses? Is there some way we can see or to know how those funds was allocated and to what projects?
So Skylar,
I don't know if I quite understand the question.
So the question is really, I think, Councilperson Tillman, you want to know what projects were in what wards or what TIFs, what projects were proposed, completed, and in each one of those TIFs, correct?
Correct, but then so once they've reached their maturity, so those the funds from that.
So like Elston Grove would be first ward, Wabash first ward. Is that what you mean? The bonds?
So after the bonds are done and it's allocating the revenue, so after everything's been paid off, so the monies that's remaining, how is it being used? Is it going back into the city, or is it going into the wards as it should be, or is it going back into that business and their infrastructure?
Well, I guess I would just say that we would, that's what Andy was getting at when he was like, so with the debt that we have, he was saying with the south side, we have I think it was 1.7 to do projects with. So we in turn use that money. If that's the extra, if you will, we would do projects like we have a Town Center Drive project that we're working on down there. We have what are some other projects down there? We actually want to do a alternative, like a sidewalk project down there along 421. We have some projects in the works that we're planning on funding with, I guess, that extra $1.7 million that's not being used to pay the debt we own, essentially. That may include another, so say we get a bond paid off, maybe we have to bond again to fix or build a new road or something like that. But we may not know that right now, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, but so is all the extra, so to speak, revenue mostly being utilized for road projects, street projects?
Typically infrastructure projects, yes. Most in the southern TIF, typically infrastructure projects. Like Ohio Street was a bond that was issued. That's probably the most recent bond that was issued with TIF revenue.
Okay.
So Sky,
which I understand I won't say anything in the East TIF as of yet, right now. But when it becomes available, which we have the redevelopment, we have the community crossing grants match. But when will we start seeing those funds actually being utilized in the neighborhoods? What needs to be done in order to utilize the TIF, the extra from the TIFs to be utilized in our wards? What do we need to do?
I was going to say, I can jump in just from a legal perspective. The TIF can only be used in the economic development area, in the allocation area, projects that are located in or serve, right? So to the extent you have projects in neighborhoods that are not in the TIF area, it's very difficult to use the TIF dollars in that neighborhood. I know we do projects sometimes where we be creative, and so if you have a road that is, you know, in a neighborhood that needs work, that runs into a TIF area, we can find ways to be able to use the TIF dollars in that neighborhood for that road project, or for the sidewalks, or for the utilities that are in that, you know, but it just, you know, it just takes a little creativity to do that.
Yeah.
So there are ways to do that, but as a, you know, a general response without knowing specific facts, it really does get sort of fact-based on, you know, if we do a project in, and I'm using my hands, you can't see them, I'm sorry, but if we do a project that's in a neighborhood over here that is not in a TIF area, then we have to be able to say with a straight face that the project somehow serves the TIF area,
Right.
if we're using redevelopment TIF money. And so it can be done, but it isn't always easy to do it. And in some cases, it just simply can't be done because they're just, the argument is just too attenuated. It's just not possible.
Understandable. Then my
That's
last
much better.
one is, but can TIF be used for private projects? If
And so
it's in the TIF area,
I'm sorry?
can TIF monies be used for private projects within the TIF area?
TIF money can be used in a way for private projects, in that economic development revenue bond, where the developer is buying the bond, they're actually being paid for that project. And so there is a way to do it for a development project that's creating assessed value and jobs. Yes, you can do that. And the Royski TIF area, for that bond that was issued for that company, that's a great example of that. That bond is now paid off, but that is a mechanism. And I know the Redevelopment Commission has talked over the last few years, as developers have been looking at projects in and around the lake, using that technique to be able to fund projects, to provide that incentive. And that gets to what Andy and I were talking about. The strongest incentive local governments have is tax increment revenue, because of just exactly what you asked about, the ability to use those TIF dollars to incent projects to happen in a community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Sorry, Tracy. He has a much better answer.
Skylar, you have a couple of offline questions.
I know we're running real quick. I think one of them just got answered. Basically, the question was, so can you take money from the North TIF and use it in other areas of the city outside the North TIF boundary? I believe Mr. Rampola just basically answered that question. It's harder to do. You have to justify. You have to make certain findings for that to connect it back. And then the other question is, since 1999 to today's date, how much money total has been in the North TIF? I don't know that we have the answer to that tonight. I know that Baker Tilly has been working with us for numerous years. You might be able to go back to 1999 and pull some numbers forward, but I don't know that we'll have the answer, or that he has the software to do that tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could spend some time pulling that. I know we typically keep a maybe 10-year kind of running tab on historical value. So I could see if we could go back in our system. I guess, what is that, 22 years or so. I know we've definitely have more recent year collections pretty easily that I could pull, but we could see what we have and pull some of that together. That would be no problem.
We're running close on time, Dahlia. I know you got your hand up, so in your councilman, so I'm gonna let you go. It's your meeting.
Really quickly, I would really love to get a poster-sized map of all the TIF districts drawn out. That's like my request. I think that would be very helpful to me personally. Thank you.
So like a 36 by 36 or something like that? Okay.
With an
Talk to
overlay.
Mr. Bates about that.
With an overlay of the urban enterprise zone as well.
Okay. I'll do the urban enterprise zone. We'll put, yeah, we can do that. We can do that.
Thank you.
Wards maybe too, just saying.
It'll get jumbled up at a certain amount of time. I'll see what it looks like. Let me see what it looks like. It may get so ununderstandable at some point in time, but let me see what I can do.
Thanks again.
Anything else for the better good of the discussion here? I know you guys got to run.
Mr. Paul Przybylski.
Yes, I was wondering if there's under a statute that we can have a meeting, because I have some concerns about the Bloxham property to schedule a executive session in the near future to find out, you know, a little bit more. Is it by state statute that we can meet together? And so I'm just bringing that up, that I would like to see an exec session. Thank you.
So I would refer to Paul Przybylski. I would refer you and Alan Cernick, our attorney. Would you chime in?
Good evening.
Hello, Alan.
Great enlightening discussion. I'm not sure specifically what you're asking, Mr. Councilman. There's litigation going on between Bloxham. There was a development agreement or an agreement, mitigating agreement entered into between the Redevelopment Commission and Bloxham in 2009. And that's kind of where things are at in trying to get that to move forward. But there is an active lawsuit that is pending, and for settlement discussions, are not only not admissible in court, but they're also not binding under the open door law as well. And that's really where we are at this point. I understand what you're saying, and I think the concern you're saying is the fact that what's going on with the Bloxham plant, because what's going on with the Bloxham plant in 2021 is the same thing that was going on in 2009. And how do we move forward? And I think that's the question that both sides are looking at.
Well, that isn't what I'm looking for. I think we all know, most of us know that. What I'm looking for is it against state statute to have a executive session with the city council and the redevelopment commission to talk about this litigation and to be brought up to speed on what is transpiring there.
Well, again, I don't think there's anything that says that both bodies cannot have an executive session to discuss litigation. But what I just shared with you is what's going on with it. And it wouldn't be any different in an executive session other than the actual settlement discussions themselves, which at this point are not formal, have not been final, and so therefore not subject to public disclosure at this point.
I understand what you're talking about, Mr. Cernick. I just want to have, I think that it is in the best interest of transparency with the council to have a sit down and to talk about some of these issues that are regulated by state statute. Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap this up now. We've got another meeting to go. Thank you, Angie, for spearheading this whole thing. It's been one of the best training and development tools that I've had since I've been on the council. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
If I can make one more comment. As Skylar and I and Attorney Cernick spoke separately today, I believe that this type of training or this type of discussion is prudent moving forward with whenever there's a change in the commission, a change in the city council, so that there's a true understanding. TIF is not terribly complicated, but it's important. It's an economic tool for us to move forward. So, and it behooves us as civic leaders, as people that are serving our community, to make sure that we're in tune with what's going on in the economic development tools that are available to us. So I spoke to Skylar today and said, when there's a change in the city council next time, it needs to be on our agenda to have a workshop, because you cannot leave a city council person at bay, or a redevelopment commission person at bay. This is a terribly important economic development tool for us, and if we don't educate our folks, that's shame on us for not to do that. So our commitment, my commitment, Skylar's commitment, Attorney Cernick's commitment is to make sure that we communicate and we be as transparent as possible. So thank you for your time. On to your next endeavor tonight, and thank you very much. Have a great evening, and please communicate with us with any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Much.